like to welcome everyone to today's program, sponsored by the Plant Initiative, The Wisdom of Trees, a conversation with David Macauley and Laura Pustarfi. I'm Paul Moss, the Executive Director of the Plant Initiative, and I'm really excited to introduce David and Laura and to start off our 1-hour program, which will be moderated by Keith Williams. So Dr. David Macauley is Academy Professor and Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Environmental Studies at Penn State University, Brandywine. He's taught at Oberlin College, Emerson College, and New York University, and was a Mellon Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. Macauley is the author of Elemental Philosophy, Earth, Air, Fire, and Water as Environmental Ideas, editor of Minding Nature, The Philosophers of Ecology, co-editor of The Seasons, Philosophical, Literary, and Environmental Perspectives, and co-editor of the book we'll be talking about today, The Wisdom of Trees. He has published articles on ethics, aesthetics, politics, Greek philosophy, and continental thought. Dr. Laura Pustarfi is adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and she is director of the Psychedelic Assisted Therapies and Research Certificate, also at CIIS. Her scholarly work examines trees and plants, trees and plants in Western thought, with particular focus on philosophical literature in order to explore an arboreal and vegetal ontology and ethics that respects plants themselves. Laura has presented at several academic conferences, both nationally and internationally, and Laura is a board member of the Plant Initiative. Moderator Dr. Keith Williams is an assistant professor in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University. His work focuses on better understanding how to be good relations with our more than human kin, particularly plants and fungi. Keith draws heavily on post-human philosophy, indigenous thought, and his lived experience with family members, human and otherwise. Keith is also a board member of the Plant Initiative. The program will start with a half hour of conversation between David, Laura, and Keith. And for the remainder of the program, David and Laura will be responding to questions posed by you, the attendees, that will be presented by Keith as selected from questions that are posted in the Zoom chat. So we encourage you to please suggest a question or more for David and Laura to discuss by posting it in the chat, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. This program is being recorded and it will be posted online on the Plant Initiative's YouTube channel, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered. So with that, I'm turning over the program to Keith.
Thank you so much, Paul, and what a pleasure to be here. Before we start with the questions, I'd just like to offer a brief sort of acknowledgement of land or place. I live in Nova Scotia, or Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people. I was out today picking berries, and I happened to wander into the woods just briefly, and I encountered one of my favorite trees there, the mountain ash or rowan tree. And I just love their shine, the shine of their bark and their delicate leaves. And I would like to invite all of the attendees to share a bit about the territory that they come from and any encounters that they've had with trees recently in the chat. And with that, I think it's time to start with the questions. So this first question is directed at both Laura and David regarding their beautiful book, which we're here to talk about today, The Wisdom of Trees. So a thread running through your text deals with the agency of trees, in some cases even the personhood of trees. This may seem like an outrageous or outlandish idea to some of us who are schooled to believe that the natural world is inanimate. How can trees have agency? Trees don't look like us, they don't act like us, they don't relate like us or smell like us, although I have been compared to the smell of a black spruce at times, but I think that that was maybe I don't know, unintentional. Given all of that, Laura and David, how can trees possibly be conceived of as persons?
I'll defer to Laura to start this one. Go ahead.
Right, thanks, David, and thanks for this conversation. Thanks for this great question, Keith. I think this is such an important question and really gets to the heart of some of the issues concerning trees. And you kind of pointed this, but agency and personhood are ongoing debates in plant studies, the interdisciplinary field that focuses on plants primarily in the humanities, as well as in plant signaling and behavior in biology and the sciences. And I think it's important to think about how agency and personhood are defined. And I define agency as intentionality, and it involves the ability to make decisions. So it contrasts that with simply responding to external stimuli in the environment. And as you kind of mentioned, that a lot of the received wisdom, especially in the Western view of plants, is that plants are just like machines or automatons, and that, for example, if a bug chews on the leaf of a tree, there's an automatic defense there. But there's a lot of science coming out that this is much more complex, and the tree mounts quite a lot of varied defenses and also shares information with other trees, including with, especially with kin trees that are more closely related to them in the forest. And so that those other trees can mount a defense preemptively as well. And it seems like this is intentional action. It seems to be a capacity that trees have to decide on their response. And with that idea comes the idea of agency with trees and plants. And then also personhood is very complex. If trees do have personhood, I don't think it's anything like human personhood. I think it would be an arboreal personhood. And it's unclear what that might look like. I think that's still being developed, is exactly what arboreal personhood or vegetal personhood might be. But for example, corporations have personhood, and there's legal rights and responsibilities that come with that. A lot of cultures do see trees as persons. Um, and I just want to point out that in our volume, we thank trees in the acknowledgements, and I think this was important. I particularly thank the trees that were lived nearby me in Tilden Park in Berkeley and in Crane Creek Park in Sonoma County, California here, which is just to note is Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok territory here in California. And I think that that's an important way to acknowledge the trees as well as we're having these debates around agency and personhood. David, I'll pass it your way.
Yeah, no, great response. I don't have a lot to add, just maybe echoing what Laura said, that we're discovering scientifically how active trees are, how dynamic they are in their environment, not just passive entities. And so they increasingly show the complexity, the qualities of systematic relations with their environment. And as Laura pointed out, legally, corporations, even robots, AIs are being extended personhood. There's a robot, an AI named Sophia that in a Middle Eastern country was basically granted a kind of personhood status. So, and animals have been one way to reason to do this is to protect them legally. So those are the bigger picture is important to consider there. And then also, and this applies to things like talking about wisdom of trees or the forest, that we have to think in terms of degrees, and we can't just think anthropocentrically, like just the idea people tend to think of humans as persons and as the only persons. And so, yeah, the philosophical dimensions of personhood, whether that's talking about fetuses or corporations, is a malleable category that needs to be interrogated. So, yeah, just a few additional points.
Great, thank you, Laura and David. The next question, actually, before I ask the next question, if it's not clear to the audience, I just want to say how much I love this book. It's an incredible piece of work, and you know, I love everything about it, like the conceptual arc, the structure, the writing. Really, bravo to both of you for doing this making this beautiful piece of work that's also so important and timely right now. Speaking of the structure, I wonder if you could share a little bit about the structure of the wisdom of trees.
You want to start with this one, David?
Yeah, we talked about different possibilities. Laura, do you remember where we were like, do we want to use that? It's a common idea of the trunk, the branches, the roots, right? That's been, if some of you may know Richard Powers, the Overstory, he employs that, and we didn't really go with that. I think we start off with ontology and maybe go to language. And then end up with value questions. And a late addition, I can say, was this idea of including interstices, which was a sort of fun addition at the end, where we got to put in some photographs. A lot of times in philosophy, at least, there's a word heavy, quality to it. So we each chose four different trees and meditated briefly on that as segues between them. But we tried to be fairly synoptic and pluralistic about the approach, given that it's really the first book attempt or volume to think philosophically about trees. We wanted to embrace a number of different approaches rather than impose some sort of structure. It kind of evolved organically. We had a number of people we wanted to invite, and then we tried to keep a sort of loose sinuous thread through it. Hopefully it works, but we didn't want too much order. I think, I don't know, what do you want to add, Laura, to that that process of back and forth? Yeah.
I might even say it unfolded a bit vegetally in that way that
Okay.
as we developed it. It was quite a long process over many years, and as you mentioned, that thread, all of the chapters are more or less tied to continental philosophy, although it's a very interdisciplinary volume. And I also just want to note, especially that the volume has a wonderful foreword by the ecologist environmental activist Joan Maloof, who I see is here. So thanks for joining, Joan, and for your wonderful foreword. And then also an afterword by Don Hanlon Johnson, who is one of the main thinkers who developed somatics, as well as just all of the contributors gave us wonderful chapters. So many aspects on trees, as you mentioned, language and place and ecology. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about legalities a little later as well.
Yeah, just we found, and maybe Laura did this more in her early work, is that trees can seem to be connected with everything, goodness, politics, the law. So that was, and I think there was an enthusiasm. Almost everybody we asked wanted to jump on board because, and I think it maybe we're both interested in hearing what some of the audience have their connections with trees, because that's exciting when there's an enthusiasm for a topic, that it's not just kind of a pedantic or scholarly pursuit, that there's a real living quality to that. People live with trees, they mourn them, they plant them and then connect with death. And there's a contribution by Al Lingus, who just died a few months ago, and his is on birth and death in relation to trees. So I think that enthusiasm was part of it, strangely, the structure of the book too. So
Thank you. I guess a follow-up to question two, regarding the interstices. Laura, your interstice on redwood, I found it very beautiful and compelling. And moving from that interstice to chapter one, I felt like I was departing from a place of mist and mystery, of silent grandeur, and the potency of your prose. It led me to wonder about your personal relationships with those ancient giants. And then I guess maybe I can just quickly ask David's too, and then we if you're able to respond. Okay, so David, your interstice on the banyan, and that paints a really immersive picture of the banyan tree as all-encompassing or embracing. And I was left with a sense of the banyan as world, like this is an entire world. And I wonder if in your response, if you could talk a little bit about that and your relationship with the banyan tree. So.
Sure,
Yeah,
go ahead, Laura.
thanks for your kind words, Keith, about that interstice in the redwoods. And that interstice was, in particular, was inspired by Armstrong Redwood State Park up in Guerneville, California here. And actually the photo that's in there is one of my sister standing between these huge redwood trees. And I do feel particularly connected to redwoods. You may have heard the term charismatic megafauna. I consider redwoods charismatic megaflora as well. And they're very prevalent here in the Bay Area, although they're where they grow has been greatly reduced with logging, and there's very little old growth forest left. And Armstrong Redwood State Park is one of those places where it's so green and lush, and under the trees the temperature changes. You can see trees that have fallen over, and big uh, pieces where you can actually go and look at the roots of how these trees exist in the ground. And it there's just something, as you mentioned, so wonderful about that and awe-inspiring about those particular trees. And they are special to me. There are several trees that are special to me as well, but the redwoods, I enjoy being around redwoods in particular. So I'm glad you enjoyed that little piece of writing and reflection.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
In terms of the banyan, yeah, I don't know. I've always found them intriguing. I think I used to visit my sister in Florida, and I would take a lot of pictures of the banyans I saw. And we did even a family photo where, the family tree where we're perched in the branches and around it. And then a book I wrote on called Elemental Philosophy. The cover photo was of a banyan in Bali. Uh, so yeah, that's just sort of part of the interest, but the aerial roots, the fact that it's like such an interconnective tree um, is of interest. It has, of course, medicinal properties. When a banyan dies, it becomes then sort of a dwelling place for other organisms, in dying, it gives birth to a place for uh, other species. It's like I said, it's connectivity to place. It's all, as one of the chapters sort of argues by Martyr and Casey, the trees are places, not just like part of a place. And then there's a rich heritage of the banyan in both Hinduism and Buddhism. There's references in the Bhagavad Gita. Um, so it's just that both the cultural and the biological dimensions or the botanical dimensions of it, I think is a reason that many of us can find banyans. They're just beautiful too. I mean, sometimes it's the aesthetics that attract us to things, initially. They're unusual, and I think banyans hold that kind of quality.
That's a very good point, David, and that really echoes some of what you wrote in your chapter in the book as well, which I really enjoyed, by the way. Um, so, Laura, I wonder if you could share with us what is arboreality and what is arboreal ethics? Why are these concepts important? And what can we learn from our planty kin to inform our own conception of the good life or living well for humans?
Arboreality is a word that's often used in the sciences, and it refers to species that live in trees. But we've used it as a play on the Latin word for arbor, tree, and reality or being. So we're using it in that expanded sense. And also about the relationships between humans and trees, to think a little bit more closely about how we as humans interact with trees. And arboreal ethics is considering trees themselves as worthy of moral consideration, as intrinsically and ontologically valuable beings. And this way of thinking about ethics as vegetal or arboreal, it includes the plants and trees themselves, but not just in connection to humans. So it's not just about the way that trees and plants are used instrumentally by humans, and that means that they're ethically valuable to us. It's about that intrinsic value of the the trees and plants are ethically worthy of consideration themselves.
Mm.
And I think that's such an important point in terms of thinking more so about the trees and plants. I do want to note that some people prefer to talk about sentience or cognition, consciousness for trees and plants. I sometimes worry that might go a little too far depending on how we're defining those terms. But this idea of trees is important for ethical consideration seems critical. And I really appreciate the way that you're mentioning plant kin. And I don't know that in the West we can consider living well or a kind of eudaimonic good life without thinking about the well-being of more than humans in addition to humans. And we often try to do just that as we're thinking about ethics, the good life. What does that mean for us as humans? And so I'll leave it there and see, David, if you want to add anything.
No, no. Yeah, the ethical dilemmas, I'll just put it, that are certainly big ones in terms of which trees, do forests have a different status than individual trees? Do, the ones we find in an urban environment, are they different than the ones that, grow on their own? Uh, where do we and how do we draw the line? Maybe those are down the road, but even just getting people to acknowledge that they are beings, that they have a status that we need to consider. In my chapter, I've sort of interested in this connection between beauty and duty, just the powerful sense of encountering something that is other than us, but is related to us. A first moment is that sense that there's something there that merits ethical consideration, and that we want to respect. For many, that's, it's we're not even to that point. And so I think getting out and just in the woods or for a walk is an initial way. There's an ethical framework by this philosopher Levinas that talks about the face and the consideration of the front, the eyes, right? And just the encounter, or Martin Buber, philosopher, that experience, and it's really an encounter more than an experience, is important for sometimes just changing our relation. And so that's the importance of getting people out into the woods or for a walk in a park or whatever it is. So there's lots of things. I think we're just at this initial phase in critical plant studies where many of the people I think that are here are interested in is important. Even I think house plants, I got interested in just growing my own plants as a kid in a little, greenhouse that I built. We build on that. So yeah, lots of things to say, but I think Laura got us off to a good start.
Definitely. And I'm looking at the time and I see that we've got about 5 minutes before audience questions. So although I've got many more questions to ask you, there is one that I'd like to make sure that we touch on before we move to the next phase of this webinar. And this is a question for both of you. As I mentioned earlier, I appreciate the importance of this text that you've written, especially considering the extent to which we have been shaped by and depend on trees and forests. really, it's like our collective liberation is bound up together with the more than human, no question in my mind. And I think your book serves a very important role in helping people to see that and appreciate that. But I guess what I'd like to know for both of you is, what is your vision for what this book can do in the world? What impacts would you like to see this beautiful and important book have in the world, and how could that happen?
Do you want to start? It's a
Sure.
great question. It's going to be a challenging one, and I think I would almost want to also defer to the audiences because we need many new ideas. But go ahead, Laura.
I absolutely agree in terms of the new ideas. I do hope this book inspires scholars and students and anyone to research and write more about trees and plants, and encourages classes and workshops on these ideas. But also, as you mentioned, David, I hope it just helps a few people go outside and see trees a little differently. Um, and I this is an academically focused text, so that's where I think is the primary impact. But I hope events like these help the ideas go out to a broader audience as well. And ultimately, I hope that it means more trees and forests will be protected from deforestation, from logging, and that I one of the ways that I think about trees, and I use this phrase sometimes, is kind of our arboreal neighbors. I like to think about trees um, that way, of just kind of, as you mentioned, David, just walking outside, going for the woods. Right outside my home is a wonderful sweet gum tree, so I consider that tree my arboreal neighbor, coming from the southeast, but growing here in California, and just being able to think about the idea of being in the presence of another being, of the tree as a being worthy of respect and ethical consideration, as mentioned earlier. So that's a bit about what I hope the impact of the book might be. But David, I'm curious what you might say too.
Yeah, I don't know. We touch on this at the very end of the introduction. I think we called the section something like planting the future. Right? So I don't know about the book. Once the book is out there, it's on its own. It's like a child that's going to do or not do certain things, and it's out of our hands, right? But I think we reference a Chinese proverb that says like, "When's the best time to plant a tree?" Well, it was like something to the effect of like yesterday or 20 years ago, right? But the trees are linked to the future, right? In whether it's, you use the metaphor of family trees, right? We're bequeathing something. You plant a redwood now, the some of the benefits might not be for 100 years or whatever. But I think that it's a way of perduring for people. You go to the cemetery and you see the trees that are connected in some sense to the people below them, and we plant trees in honor of others, and there's survivor trees like the ginkgo trees in Hiroshima or even the 9/11. They're monuments. And I think, when you ask people why they're concerned about the environment, if they are, and most people to some extent are, it's because of things like future generations. They want their children to have a better world, and the trees contribute to that. And so I would just say maybe less about the book, but starting conversations about these kind of questions. Um, a poet who died maybe a year or two ago, W.S. Merwin, says, "On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree," right? It sounds kind of strange, but it makes a sense because it allows us to think about the future, to survive. And I would also want to connect it to things not just with individuals, but policy. We need resistance, we need reclamation, we need reclaiming areas, wild areas. So the ethics and the philosophy also has, in my view, at least has to become public. We need to press our politicians. We need to preserve, extend areas, because individuals can do many things, but the policy and the politics, um, related to deforestation. Great things like the seed bank that exists in Norway. So these are where individuals can make a difference. So last point would be, I would just call it like moral imagination. Trees
Mm,
help us to think
mm,
in ways that are much bigger than ourselves, individuals. And we all need, whether you're religious, spiritual, or neither of those, it's something bigger than us, just the
mm.
forest and so forth. And I think you can't help but be changed by those connections. For some, it may be animals or different kinds of plants, but that sense that there's something larger and bigger than us, I think is trees help that experience, you know, the moral imagination.
I love that. Moral imagination. That's excellent. Wow. Thank you both for these illuminating and thoughtful responses. And I can see that we have a number of questions in the chat. So maybe I'll start reading them to you if that's okay.
Sure.
So Jason Hogue writes, question regarding the Levinasian face. I've been thinking about the encounter of the other between humans and plants. It seems a lot more obvious that many or most animals have faces, for example, eyes and noses, etc. But how do plants or trees have faces? Or in what sense do they have a face? And then in brackets, non-anthropomorphically. I don't know who wants to go first.
You want to start with this one, David, or should I?
I can say a couple things. I mean, just off. So we have to think maybe not always the face as the human face, right? Um, and of course, we often think of faces with eyes, right? And that's that because the eyes look back. And in this philosopher Levinas, it commits, he argues that it generates this kind of command, do not hurt me, when something looks back and there's an exchange, a chiasm, even. But if we think of a face also in terms of a surface, right? A surface that has
Mm,
texture, that has color, that has um, features and properties that attract us, that also command us to look. The knots in a tree sometimes are a little bit like eyes. A face can be a front, right? We don't see the backs of people, but I would even argue in some sense the face of the human extends all the way down the front. What part do we look at? Does it change us? And so it doesn't have to always be thought in terms of like the animal face. You can have a face of a cliff, right? Like I said, the surface and sensual qualities of something in an encounter with a plant, with an organism. And plants move in different ways. They're sessile beings, I mean, trees, but they do move through their seeds. They move through climate change. Birds pick up, especially when you think of a plant or particularly a tree as a phenomenal field, right? It extends into the branches, into the soil, into the air, right? We can kind of decenter the plant sometimes, just as we can maybe a little more difficultly with the human, but we extend beyond our bodily being, right? Heidegger, I don't want to get too philosophically obscure here, but like you can think of humans as a field of care. So how far does your field of care
mm,
extend? Could
mm.
include this sort of sense of the ethical as part of an enlarged face or field or force, and so on. I don't know, Laura, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I think this is a great question. I had also thought about Heidegger, who has a great passage talking about a apple tree in bloom, saying, won't get the quote exactly here, but to meet the tree face to face. And that
Mm.
way of interacting with the tree that is, or any being in the world, um, of really deeply looking, considering, makes me think of respect. We had brought that up before, and root of respect is to look again, to
Mm.
think again about that encounter that we had discussed. And so I think that looking again, I appreciate what you said, David, about the extension of face or the surface as well. And that's been my own experience too, of spending time with trees and paying deep attention to one tree in particular. And I don't know that I would have at the time considered it a face, but there is a way of a connection that relationship deepens, and then there's a way of, especially over time, over the seasons, over years, getting to know another being and how they grow and change. And there is something that trees are so much older than humans often. Trees are so much larger than humans often. So at my eye level, I'm looking usually at bark, and I'm within the tree, thinking about the roots and the branches. So just thinking more deeply about that experience of being myself embodied within the tree, and then looking more closely, considering again the tree. I think the idea of the Levinasian face and the encounter of the other, the alterity becomes more present, but also the similarities or parallels become more present in my experience.
I just had one quick thing. So I have a poet friend that was at Haverford College, and he had his students um, adopt, so to speak, a tree on campus, an individual tree, and then spend time with the tree and write about the tree like a poem. And then toward the end of that experience, they would take the class, he would take the class, sit under the tree, have the student
Mm.
read the poem. So they're connecting with an individual tree, spending time thinking about it. And Thoreau also did this. He called them making appointments. He would trudge, 10 miles to actually visit a tree like we would a cousin or a grandparent or something. So there's these different practices of one might make to, think of the tree as a being, or, if you want to think facially. I mean, and I think it's also a challenge, with different kinds of plants, because you can move the plants sometimes into your house, as I think Paul had a tree, I mean a plant in the background there. But anyway,
Thank you both. So the next question is from Viva. How much is continental philosophy in conversation with indigenous ways of knowing and understanding plants and all our relations? And they specifically bring up Robin Wall Kimmerer.
This is such a great question, and I think not enough. I think that there are a few thinkers putting these both traditions in conversation, but not enough. Continental philosophy is coming from the Western tradition, and with the challenges that come with that. And I deeply respect Robin Wall Kimmerer's work and have learned so much from her writing. And I think that a lot more can be done for interdisciplinary conversation and connection between those. But also, Keith, I'm curious what you think about this as question as well, if you're open to commenting.
Oh,
also.
Sure. Maybe after I will. Maybe after David, if you want to take a crack at it, I can. Thank you, Laura. I will totally.
so the question was how well continental philosophy is open and amenable, or has been to the um, to plants, or was it trees in particular?
How much is continental philosophy in conversation with indigenous onto-epistemologies or ways of knowing and yeah, knowing and understanding plants?
I think there's increasing interest. Um, I'd say there's more like more and more amenable to trees and plants. I'm not sure less of the continental. There are a number of figures working with the indigenous, the aboriginal, but it's not as let's say there could be a lot more, but it's happening slowly, maybe not fast enough. In terms of the plants in particular, Michael Marder is a real key figure there. And, uh, and there's a piece that he co-wrote for the book. Um, yeah, there's lots more work to be done, I think there. Um, but I think the good thing about continental philosophy is maybe it's a little more receptive to these non-Western or Eastern or Aboriginal than, let's say, analytic philosophy and certain other traditions.
Yeah, I'll just say something really quick, and I would agree with both of you completely, especially around continental philosophy being a little bit more amenable to be in conversation with other ways of knowing and being. And it strikes me that, just looking at that question, I actually can't really think of any continental philosophers that are engaging in a meaningful way with Indigenous ways of knowing and being off the top of my head. I can't think of anyone. But I would say that there's some interesting overlap between, and these are coming from totally distinct genealogies, coming from, for example, new materialism, posthumanism, and even some of the kind of texts that inspired those movements, like A Thousand Plateaus. So there's some really interesting intersections between those kind of continental approaches and Indigenous thought. But I think from what I know and understand, the primary difference is that Indigenous philosophy is really, this is a this is like these are teachings that are grounded in communal lived experience and practice, and have been handed down over millennia. And that's quite, in a way, quite different from academic philosophy. So I think there's a really profound and fundamental difference there. And I think in that way, I guess what my hope is for continental philosophy, anthropology, like all of these different Western disciplines, is that they will start to realize the value of Indigenous thought and approach that not as a subject of study, but as a partner in exploration of how to live the good life and how to be in this world.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Keith. One just quick thought. Of the contributors we have, John Ryan, I think has done increasing work in that area, and particularly in the
Mm,
Australian um, traditions and the Aboriginal and poetry he relates to, and he's interested in Buddhism and with trees and
mm,
plants, and I believe, is also a poet himself. So there are
yeah.
figures in philosophy. Scott Pratt has done some work on Native American philosophy. So there are some, there is some marginal work, but John Ryan, I
Mm.
think, is he involved with the Plant Initiative, or is it the plants in the Anthropocene? Do you know, Laura? He's
I know he's, yeah, I know he's the editor of the journal Plant Perspectives. I'm not sure if
Plant
he's,
Perspectives.
yeah,
Yeah,
involved with
Mm.
networking with plants in the Anthropocene, but
yeah,
Yeah. But it's quite amazing when you think about, just these two or three names that come up, and it's like, given the vast number of people working in these fields, it's like, wow, how is it that we're only arriving at this now, and there are reasons, but
yeah.
um, so there is another question from Elisa Garlock. Um, we are working to try to save a historic landscape of elder trees that are part of the ecology of a creation story of Indigenous in San Antonio along Yanaguana Spirit Waters up against a city focused on development at the detriment of the ecological system. What suggestions could help sway our new mayor to better understand? Yeah, the crux of this question is, what suggestions could help sway our new mayor to better understand the ecological value of our established trees?
I think this is a great question where the practical nature of these conversations really comes to the forefront. And well, I don't have a lot of experience at kind of at that local level with mayoral decision making, my initial sense is to get as many people involved as possible. When I was living in Charleston, South Carolina, there was a big push to preserve the area around the angel oak tree on John's Island, which is the tree that's on the cover of the Wisdom of Trees book. And the person who led that charge got a lot of signatures, did research, and that angel oak tree was always planned to be preserved, but there was supposed to be quite a lot of development right next to it, and they were able to successfully argue that a large area needed to be preserved in order to have the angel oak tree have those kin trees nearby and not be um, damaged by any of the development. And getting as many people as possible who love the tree involved, I think, is important. I believe it's a quote from Joanna Macy, who um, is an environmental activist and writer who just recently passed, and that you save what you love. And so engaging those people who love that particular tree, that particular area, and having ways for that movement to make it to the ears of the mayor's office might be a way to get started.
Right. And that makes me think of David, something you wrote in your chapter about beauty and duty, which actually I think ties in really nicely with Laura's response. Don't feel you have to speak to that though, but
Yeah. Just briefly on if I understood the question, I was thinking about it was mentioned the older trees, right? That these,
elder trees, and
yeah,
maybe that's like older in that case rather
yeah,
than
but
elder
yeah,
bushes.
so just a reference here that might not help on the practical political aspects, but a historian at University of Pennsylvania named Jared Farmer who's written about California trees, but he has a book called Elder Flora, and it's really about what he terms, I think it's chronodiversity. So there's biodiversity, which we're familiar with, but it's the importance of time and these witnesses to time. I mean, especially the redwoods, the sequoias, older trees, that we need to value entities, beings, whatever term you want to use there, that have been around for a while because they not just measure time, they hold time, they hold the place. And I think that's a place maybe to consider. Why is time? Because we think time, the future, we want these trees to be around. But one way, almost paradoxically, I think, not paradoxically, but counterintuitively, to think about the future is to respect the past because it shows continuity. It shows that there's connectivity. People that have things around from their families or from, historical objects. My father was a historian, tend to want to project them into the future, whether that's uh, just humans. But anyway, the idea of chronodiversity and elder flora, maybe that's a kind of something we need to think about. And to, get people out and, these beings that have been around longer than us. It's kind of
Mm,
like the Asian traditions in Confucianism, honor your elders and these. So I don't know. It's a more
mm,
philosophical, historical
mm.
point, but maybe it's helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. Um, so the next question, curious question, uh, by Gail Lynn, was recycled paper used for the book?
Laura, go ahead.
That's a great question. We had asked the publisher about this, and we had pushed for this. And as I understand, with SUNY Press, there are some challenges with that. So I don't know off the top of my head that it was recycled paper, but we did ask that the book could be done as ecologically friendly as possible and with respect for the trees as much as possible.
Yeah. Just very briefly, I believe Laura just signed a contract for a new book on trees, and I believe she's worked that into the contract. Uh, there's something else I was going to say. I lost the thought. about that. But it's a good question. Yeah, I lost my second thought.
So, sorry, I might have provoked a stream of reactions on that. That might have been a bit of the problem there. My apologies.
I'm sorry, I thought of it. So we apologize. The price right now is sort of prohibited for the book, but in a few months it'll come out as a paperback book. I think there's the ebook option, which is much more affordable. I don't know, maybe $30. The way the publishers just work these scholarly, it's $140, which, is just prohibitive for a lot of people. But that's to sell to institutions and libraries and so forth. So it'll be more affordable. You can probably also get it at the library, in which case there's not a production of more use of more trees to protect trees. So that was kind of out of our hands.
Actually, I have a quick question myself, just a really quick one, because I want to get on to the next one from the audience. Laura, you mentioned earlier that, pardon me, you felt that this book was academic in tone. And I don't know, maybe it's hard for me to kind of gauge that because I tend to read a lot of academic books, but I felt that it was, yes, it's academic, but I also felt that it's accessible to non-academics. That was my read. What do you both think about that?
I'm so glad to hear that, Keith, and I hope that's the case. Would love more feedback about that if others have it as well. But I'm curious what you think, David.
I'm glad that it's a trick. Who is your reader? Who are you writing for?
Yeah.
And we have, whatever, 15, 16 contributions and afterword and introduction. And so the style, we tried to be open. David Rothenberg has a piece that's kind of speculative. Do trees sing, right? Or Al Lingus is a little more, it's not conversational. And then there's some that are more academic. We were trying to negotiate that, and that's always a tricky balance. And then ultimately, it's up to the reader. Some people may say, "Wow, this is really scholarly." I'll say that we tried to be a little more personal in parts of the introduction, talking about our individual connection with trees, and we tried to be inclusive of, there's a piece on East Asia that's about art, and there's lots of images. It's a tricky balance where you try and be coherent but open, and it's now up to others to make that, in my view, judgment, about it. But I'm glad, Keith, that you found it accessible.
Well, I felt that you succeeded in that, navigating or negotiating that tricky balance. It's a good blend of scholarly work and accessible work. So,
Yeah.
okay, so Rosie O'Regan has a question. The botanist Diana Beresford Kroger has said that trees have a similar chemical to humans, the one that allows us to dream. That's interesting. Imagining that trees can dream. I like where this is going. Okay, imagining that trees can dream. What do you think trees might dream about? And I don't know if you want to go into the nightmare territory or not, but maybe just stick to regular dreams. Also, have trees visited your dreams? Thank you. What a fantastic question, Rosie.
This opens up for me so many questions around what is required for dreaming and how does, we talked a little bit about consciousness before. How does consciousness, how is that potentially enacted in other beings, and is dreaming possible? It also makes me think of course, many literary writers have thought about this, but there's an old English text called the Dream of the Rood that is actually imagining the thoughts, the dream of the tree that became the cross of Christ. And so the thing, people have been thinking about the dreams of trees for a very long time. So I think you're in good company there with your question. And yes, trees have certainly come into my dreams. No specific dream comes to mind, but they certainly have appeared.
Yeah, very briefly, it's a great question because it points
Mm,
toward that sort of moral imagination, right? We're not going to claim dreams dream, but if they did, it's giving them a certain kind of like generous possibility, right? I would say, Carl Jung is a good reference on this, the alchemical symbols and the unconscious and trees are often this integrating symbol, right? When they be, not just physical or biological or botanical entities, but they enter into our thinking. And I am sure, many people think the death of someone, particularly say a parent, you plant a tree, um, the parent, continues to endure in some ways. But Carl Jung, I think, is a good source there. I wrote a fairy tale during this process, during that it's part of a trilogy, and it's about like a forest fantasy where the trees are characters and they actually like have a problem where the forest is have a pollution problem and they come together and solve this
mm,
issue. So I was sort of dreaming about these ideas. One last reference is in Taoism, the uncarved block trees, um, the are this idea of like the unconscious, right? And so the useless tree, it's called in Chinese Po, which was influenced this idea of Winnie the Pooh. Some of you may know, and uh, it's it's before the tree has been cut up, or if it's cut up, it's this sort of could be taken as a representation for like the unconscious. So you could
mm,
imagine like the
mm,
dream state, right, into
mm,
it. I don't want to get too much into that, but there's a couple references and thoughts
mm.
off the cuff. Could we ask our questioner what briefly maybe they could put in the chat what they entered into their dreams and any quick
I think that was Rosie O'Regan. If you're here, Rosie, please don't hesitate to write something in the chat. And I think we've got about 3 minutes left. And the next question, I'm not sure if we have time for another question. Paul, could you give us a thumbs up if we do, or a thumbs down if we don't have time for one more
Oh,
question?
I think probably we should start wrapping up and maybe just see
Okay.
if you and David and Laura have any final thoughts you want to share for like, a few seconds each, and then I'll do a closing so we can end in about 3 minutes.
Sure. Okay, so David and Laura, any final thoughts before we close it out?
I'll just say thanks to everyone for all of the wonderful conversation in the chat and the interest in the trees and that kind of go out and spend some time with the tree sometime soon. And I hope we can keep the conversation going in all the many ways that that can happen.
Yeah, just thank you everyone for showing up. I wish we could have had more time for more voices, but I want to also thank Keith and Paul and Laura for organizing this. You guys did a great job. Maybe just a reference, and you might give a more accurate one, Laura, there's the podcast that we did recently. I know it's a plugging for a different group, but there's a lot we got into it about the book, and we also talked about some of their contributions, whether it was about the legal status of trees or the place of trees or ethics. Yeah, the ecofeminism connection. There's a bunch of other the East Asian connection. Do you want to give that, Laura? It's like just
Sure. So it was the Networking with Plants in the Anthropocene podcast, and Kate Brelge interviewed us. That came out not too long ago, and we're very friendly with the group. So happy to share that podcast as well.
Um, one more quick point. I think there were so many questions that we didn't get to because we didn't have time. I feel like we need a whole other hour. But Chris Novel wondered if you might be willing to share your contact information. And if you are, please feel free to put that in the chat. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who came today. This is such an important work and such an important topic, and I personally would encourage all of you to take the opportunity to read this beautiful and important book. And thank you, Paul, David, and Laura for everything.
Great,
And
thanks. Thanks so much to all of you, David and Laura, as well as Keith for moderating and for your great questions today. This program has been one of a series of online events from the Plant Initiative about the human-plant connection. And our next program is going to be on September 18th, Strangers at Home, Plant-Human Migrations, a conversation with Yoda Batsaki and Giovanni Aloy. So I hope you'll join us for that as well. Again, we'll be posting the recording of this online, and I'll also include the information if you want to listen to the podcast that Laura just talked about. So thank you everyone again. And if you'd like to contribute to the Plant Initiative, we always appreciate donations through our website, plantinitiative.org. And thanks again for being here. Again, I'll post the information underneath the video on our YouTube channel. It'll have the podcast, but the podcast was from Networking with Plants in the Anthropocene. Okay, thank you everyone, and have a great day.